Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is another edition of this webinar as a collaboration between the students of the Degrowth Master at the Autonomous University of Barcelona and Debt for Climate. And today we have a fellow student coming as guest, answering our questions. This is Rosalyn Kamp. Hi, Rosalyn.
Hi, Antoine. Thanks to be here.
Thanks for coming. Rosalind, you have a master's degree in ocean governance from the University of Malta, where you are from, and you are here to talk about the ocean, right? And thanks everyone for coming. I already said it, but I say it again, because it's the end of the year here at the Masters, and everyone is tired. I am super tired. I'm looking forward to the end, but we are here. And Rosalind, because we did so much work and you did so much work writing about ocean protection and the various issues about the ocean, I was allowed to read your assignments that you wrote just recently, so it's all fresh in your memory as well. But let's start a little bit with the connection, right? Because I don't live close to the ocean. I know a few of our fellow students here also grew up close to the ocean, but I haven't. But you grew up in Malta, which is a small island, right? So, uh, can you tell us a little bit about your connection to the ocean?
Yeah, sure. Like you said, from an island, and I'm from the island of an island, Gozo. And my family is farmers, and besides that, my nunnu worked on ships, and it's just nature, not just the sea, but also the land. I, study the environment, but also the soil. And in terms of like how I studied it, it was just always my passion. Like it was just nature, and that kind of led me to my studies.
So, just to get some background first, how important is the ocean for the global ecosystem?
Well, firstly, I think the ocean is like really underrepresented, which is why I really wanted to do this talk to kind of talk about like when we have a lot of our classes on degrowth, we're not really pulling it. And this is the point is that the ocean really gives us every other breath we take. It's like the biggest ecosystem. It actually sequesters more carbon than forests. So in terms of like why should we protect the ocean? It's the same question of like why are we trying to protect and value the resources on land? The ocean has received like no it's not visible in you know in our realm, so I think we also keep it invisible in like many things that we do. However, now there's a push for it because it's been undervalued, underlooked, so now it's like the next frontier, which is not also a good thing, right?
So just to clarify, can you try to explain a little bit the process of this integration between the global ecosystem and the ocean? Like you mentioned carbon sequestration. I suppose like it's also involved in the climate, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's the global climate regulator. I mean, the deep sea regulates the ocean. It goes on a conveyor belt of like thousands of years. It goes through the world. It's a whole ecosystem, right? So looking at the ocean and even, looking at it like we are to say, what is the ocean giving us? It's giving us everything for the earth to be able to go, the terrestrial, like the ocean works with the terrestrial. So I don't know, even to be honest, even how you kind of answer this question, how you're asking this question is almost like do you understand what I'm trying to say? Sorry, I'm a bit
That's
nervous.
okay. That's okay. That's okay. So can you try to give us an example? Let's say like let's talk a little bit about ocean streams, right?
Mhm.
What's the role of like what's the role of the ocean in global warming, for example?
The ocean is actually sequestering a lot of carbon, but more than that, it's like sequestering like 90% of the excess heat. So it's actually like becoming acidification, which is why that's one of the threshold. So it's like essentially everything that we're doing on land, we're also doing on the ocean, right? Like we can do all that we want to try to protect the ocean, but unless we reduce the fossil fuels and all of this stuff, which is why it's all interconnected, right? It's not looking at the ocean as a part. It gives us food, it gives us everything just like nature does, just like land does, just like plants photosynthesize, the ocean photosynthesizes. So everything that you think of on land in the sense is on the ocean. And what I kind of wanted to talk about is that we look at like governance and sovereignty of nations, and then there's this whole sea aspect, which has its own agreements and like how these resources should be governed. And looking at more specifically the fact that they're all of ours to be governed. So there's the state, national, which usually kind of goes with the land territory, like we're talking about, and then this whole other aspect of the sea, which I'm interested in, which is areas beyond national jurisdiction. So when you think of, like I said, land and territory in this aspect versus the aspect of belonging to no one beyond the sovereignty of the nation.
Okay, so just to again to assert a few things that are maybe difficult to grasp for people who are not specialists, right? What are the threats to the oceans today? What what are the issues, the main issues that you are focusing on?
Well, that I focus on is different, but like I said, ocean acidification, right?
Okay, ocean
Over
acidification. Please explain.
Exactly.
Please explain.
The ocean taking in too much heat, essentially. Like the excess heat, it's taking in. So we're putting in a lot of heat, we're putting in a lot of carbon. It also takes the carbon, it's also taking in this excess heat. So the first thing is looking at the ocean as part of this, global system. Then you can look at the resources it has as well, besides the climate, right? It has fish, which provide us food. It provides livelihood to fishermen. Like if there's no sea creatures, there's no food. So it's food, it's livelihoods, it's coastal protections. The habitats are like coastal barriers. So in terms of like the benefits, to me, it's like life. Like when someone is like, oh, what does the ocean give you? Life. Like if we didn't have every other breath, we wouldn't have life. So that's kind of like the concept I'm really trying to ground with. Like, what does the ocean give us? Like literally everything, right?
Of course, of course. It's just like there are things that are obvious that needs to be said. Like ocean
Yeah.
acidification for me, I don't know what that means, right? So I barely like so ocean acidification is related to heat. So you mean that global warming is causing an increase of acidification, and how does that affect the fish that we eat?
Less oxygen, they can't breathe, they die.
So it's
So
something that you
less
can
oxygen
observe,
in the sea, essentially. It's becoming too
right?
hot. That's essentially what's happening. I mean, you see it with coral reefs. We're essentially going to lose all coral reefs. Like it's not even a question at this point because it's too hot. The polyps leave, they die. So it's this whole system. And with that being said, looking at the ocean as the system, it's like almost like the last frontier of do we protect it and like break the chain or yeah.
Corinne, please.
Hey, yeah, I also, if you're interested technically, Antoine, there's also first hi. There's also the fact that the ocean is technically absorbing the CO2, and then when it absorbs the CO2, there's a chemical reaction that it is dissolved in the water, and then there's a chemical reaction with the water, which forms carbonic acid, and then literally the water becomes more acidic. And some living creatures like the algae that live inside the corals, they like live in symbiosis together. These are very like sensitive to specific, they live within a specific pH range. And then when it gets too acidic, they die, which is what we call the bleaching of, this is what the bleaching of the corals is basically. So the coral is still there, but the colorful algae that live with it have died because of the acidity. And that means the total destruction of the habitat that is one of the richest habitats in the ocean, which is the coral reef that shelters so many other animals and is the breeding ground for so many of the sea creatures. I just wanted to add that.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Corinne.
That's very helpful. That's the technical explanation of this. Thank you so much. Um, Rosalind, we mentioned ocean acidification caused by global warming. Um, what about fishing?
In what sense and what aspect? In the
Like
sense,
how is fishing a threat right now? What kind of fishing is a threat? And what is like how is it regulated? How is it?
yeah, I mean, there's many aspects of fishing being a threat. First of all, looking at, I mean, you can look at the high seas fishing, you can look at bottom trawling, you can look at many things. The main thing I would say is that there's not necessarily quotas, and most of the fish that we have are overstocked. And right now, when we're looking at fishing and when we're looking at quote unquote how to use the ocean, it's the blue fix, like we were talking about, which is now moving to aquaculture. Now we're getting more than 50% of our fish protein, seafood protein from aquaculture, which has its own realm of problems, which we can elaborate if you're interested in.
So yes, of course. Like what you're saying with relation to the blue economy, also sometimes called the blue fix, but basically there is a problem of ocean conservation, and the answer is massive aquaculture. Am I understand this right? And
Sure. I mean, I would say that that's the answer of blue growth, right? Is massive
right.
aquaculture. It's this push, which is, many things. There's money from it, there's more resources. It's a whole thing in itself to digest. Um, but yes. But
And
in
so
terms of
how
fishing,
right.
it's it's such a big thing. There's like illegal and unregulated fishing. Yeah, it depends. You have to be maybe a bit more specific.
Of course. So let's talk a little bit about illegal fishing, because it hasn't stopped, right? How is the state of illegal fishing right now? How much of a problem is it? And what could be the solutions?
Right. The state of illegal fishing, what's the problem? Well, again, when you look at the sea covers and is how big, and how are we even supposed to regulate, monitor this space? Which is kind of right now what has just passed in January is the High Seas Treaty. So the High Seas Treaty has just passed. It's gone into effect this January after like 20 years of negotiation. And essentially, this treaty is to be able to create marine protected areas in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So anywhere that is the high seas. And this is kind of what we need, these kinds of tools to be able to put measures in the sea to protect certain areas, because right now, before this, there was no process to be able to protect at least places, areas in outside of nations' territories. Obviously, the fishing within each nation's territory is completely different. They own up to a certain amount. But that's what maybe we can start a little bit there with like the governance around it, because maybe that will also help clearing and we can pull from it. In terms of, so pulling back a bit, how the sea is
Mhm.
governed, right? Kind of, okay, back then, hundreds of years, it was kind of like a free for all. The sea kind of, it's like mare liberum, which is freedom of the sea. So it operated a bit as freedom of the sea. And essentially, everyone was taking everything, expanding oil, territory, nations. And so in the 60s, they came together and they are trying to kind of, how do we split up the sea? As we've learned in like our master's class, obviously these times, the 60s, 70s, 80s are where like the politics were kind of trying to, where do we go, right? So what happened is in these times in the 60s, Arvid Pardo, who's a Maltese diplomat, brought to the United Nations that the seabed should be known as the common heritage of mankind, meaning that it is owned by all of us and all of its resources are by us. And his kind of like excuse was that developing nations would need to better have access to it to help them like bring up their own development. And essentially, as we know with policies and politics, the US, again, it went over by a few decades, but they ended up not joining this treaty, specifically kind of because of this, and it brings us to the current climate that we're at now. However, UNCLOS essentially, UNCLOS regulates, like UNCLOS is the United Nations Law of the Sea, and it regulates is like the main overarching framework of everything. So there's EEZs, which are the territories of states. Each state can take up to 200 nautical miles.
Okay. So sorry. Let's try I need to ask about the acronym EEZ. What does that mean?
Yeah, exclusive economic zone. So
Okay.
under this agreement that they agreed to, they said every state that has the coastal area can go up to 200 nautical miles. Then you can own essentially all of the resources there. You can have the fishing, it's your place. And then the territorial sea only goes to 12 nautical miles. So you have the territorial sea, which is like the state's sovereign, like this is our area, and then it can go up to 200. I will say that not every, like some states do take up to 200 and some states don't. For example, Malta, we're a really small island. So our exclusive economic zone only goes 35 nautical miles, which is already 200 times the size of our island, right? So when you look at this, and we'll talk about maybe the concept of islands as well, it's this because they are allowed to have so much territory that then they're seen as like large ocean states instead of land states. And this has its own things with, the blue growth and everything. So the EEZs is up to 200 nautical miles. Everything beyond the EEZ is essentially called the high seas. And in the high seas, it's kind of free in the sense that any nation can like go through it. You have like freedom of everything, basically. There's a lot of different frameworks that are based off of that manage different things, maritime shipping and all of these things. And what I kind of focus on more is the protection aspect. So that is the deep sea mining and the high seas treaty that has just passed. So when UNCLOS and when they did this whole thing.
Sorry. Acronym alert. What is the UNCLOS, please?
UNCLOS is
yes.
what they call it. It's just the framework that governs the whole sea.
So
the
it's
United
the UN
Nations Law of the Sea.
Oh, thank you. United Nations Law of the Sea. Okay, got it.
Yeah. That essentially started being negotiated in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and it went into force in 1994.
Okay.
So it took quite a while, and then 20 years they've been working on the High Seas Treaty, which just passed in January. And if you have any questions now before I get into the ISA deep sea mining portion of
Yes,
where that
absolutely. I
came.
do have a question because you mentioned a very important concept here, I think, when I was reading your assignments, which is common heritage of humankind, and you relate to that also, especially because it was invented by a Maltese politician, a Maltese diplomat. But what was his name? Sorry.
Yeah, Arvid Pardo. I wouldn't say it was invented by him. He was the one
Right.
that brought it up essentially and said, hey, this
Right.
is a resource. Essentially, this common heritage comes from, things that are common to man. So land, sea, air. And so he kind of said, this is common to man. This should be everyone's resources. So he said, hey, and this is kind of what started the negotiations of UNCLOS was
So
this.
my question there is, how does it relate, or can you frame this within the concept of intergenerational justice? Because he's using the word heritage, which means transmission, right?
Exactly. And when they were talking about it, they said it's not just for the present generations, but future generations as well. And that was the whole common heritage of mankind principle. Now it's humankind, not mankind, but that it is everyone's. Mostly like he was one of them, and then there was someone else that brought it up, and she was saying that it should be to all things, right? Not just the mineral resources on the seabed, but also the water column, also scientific research, also oil and gas. So essentially, this was in the 70s where, the developing countries were trying to push to more like not to be bound, but I think the US kind of took over as it always does.
But
And
that was the next question, actually.
yeah.
And so it's Borgese, right? Borgese, her name
Borgese,
was?
yeah.
Borghese, but I was
Hmm.
trying to remember her name. And how was that messaging that was carried over at the UN by Borghese and Prado,
Pardo. Hmm.
Pardo, sorry. Pardo and Borghese carry this message at the UN. How is it received by the US and powerful nations at the UN?
Yeah, it's funny because sometimes, and again, it happened over decades, right? So you have to look at also like different US presidents, different nations. It was from the 60s to the 90s. So when it first started, actually before Pardo mentioned it, actually the US president, I think Johnson was the one who also said common heritage of mankind. So at the beginning, the US was for it, like they were kind of pushing for it. And then kind of what happened is, different changes in presidents and it keeps going. And then they realize and they don't want any international like creeping authority to be able to tell them if they can or can't mine the seas. So they took part of the negotiations. They quote unquote helped water it down to make sure that in the end it really just went down to like the polymatic nodules, and they didn't sign. They're still not a member to UNCLOS, the ISA, nothing.
Right. So the United States started by saying in the 60s, oh, we like this is nice, this is idealistic. Okay, we are in it, right? And then they realized that it will stop their private interest to exploit the resources of the ocean, and they never agreed to sign it, right? Okay. So we
Kind
have
of,
a
yes.
picture.
It probably went a bit more back and forth, like I said, with the different things because it
Right.
was a few decades. And what it ended up was, you know, to be just words on a paper in the sense common heritage doesn't mean anything other than that.
So you've mentioned a few things here that needs clarification about deep sea mining. So first,
Mhm.
let's talk about what it is and
Mhm.
why it's so important right now, why
Mhm.
people talk about it right now, and who is pushing for it, who
Mhm.
will benefit from it, right? So first, maybe why, right? Why is deep sea mining such a talk at this moment?
Um, so the push is that there are people saying that we need it for the green transition. That's like the biggest push is to say we need these minerals. Without these deep sea minerals, we cannot reach carbon neutrality, which in itself is just, again, when you look at the ocean as the process that is regulating the climates, how can you even, say that? That's the main
That is
push.
so that okay, this is great. This is great. Let me just try to digest that because they are saying that they need the minerals to build the technology to get to carbon neutrality, and they need those minerals because solar panels, renewable energy, batteries, right? But your argument there is that the ocean is already playing that role. So if you're going to ruin like or destroy the system of the ocean system, the oceanic system, then it will basically, it's basically like shooting yourself in the foot. Like it's breaking the system to try to improve it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But what you said with why is the push to mining now? So whenever they were writing UNCLOS, they created kind of a separate organ out of the United Nations called the International Seabed Authority. And this authority is kind of given the responsibility to both protect the marine environment, to protect the area, and also to give out exploitation licenses and to manage that, which in itself is its maybe own bit of a conflict of interest. And what happened is that there was a bit of a trigger to say there's no mining code yet, there's no mining regulations yet, but as soon as a country wants to mine, they tell us, and within 2 years, then we have to get the mining regulations. So like back in 20 late 2010s, early, anyways, somebody, Nauru, put in, I think in 2020, this 2-year agreement. So technically, we're following, these things that were put in place decades ago to now put in the mining regulations. And you kind of ask that, like, why do we need to mine it? And that's kind of the question that I came up with in my paper of the ecological sovereignty, is we're not even asking that question now, right? Like, we're not even saying, do we really need to mine it? We're still like going on this long chain of events that was like set in motion to put this thing. And instead of just like stepping back and saying, hey, we wrote these decades ago, is this really what we need? We're kind of like still going with it. And so, yeah.
Okay, we will come back to governance, but I would like to ask a little bit more about the deep sea
Mhm.
and deep sea mining. How is deep sea mining operating, and what is in the deep sea? So, okay, so did we talk about nodules?
Mhm.
Like, what is that? Where do they come from? How are they renewed? Because it's supposed to be renewed, but the process there is interesting, I think. So what are those nodules that are mined for technology, essentially, right?
Sure. So the deep sea technically consists of anything beyond 200 meters. And these minerals, the polymatic nodules are the ones that most people think of, or the ones that are most written about, but there's three different types of minerals in the deep sea: in hydrothermal vents, in cobalt-rich crusts, and in the seafloor. Obviously, the seafloor is the easiest because it's flat. The hydrothermal vents, the crusts, there's a lot of activity, more marine life, things like that. So the ocean floor is kind of the easiest, and it's the easiest also to use in terms of saying it's a desert, there's nothing there, right? So they're kind of pushing to say, that this is a completely void space. And in a sense, it kind of is, but it is in the sense that it's a really big, large space, and there is life there. There's like 90% of species we haven't even discovered yet. And the topic of also like dark oxygen, right? Like every time we go to the deep sea, we find something else. So it's, yeah, I'll
Okay,
stop.
dark oxygen, dark oxygen.
Yes.
Like it's a big question mark, but what kind of what information can you convey about this? Why do we talk about this?
Yeah, essentially, I think it was 3 years ago that there was a research that was published that said that the modules, the polymetallic nodules, are actually kind of creating this source of dark oxygen. From what I understood, it's that there's kind of like an electrical current between the nodules, and it's like creating this. And the theory is that maybe this is how life started. And then that kind of goes again back to say, wait, if we're thinking that this is even maybe the start of life and we're about to go and disturb this area, like you mentioned, these nodules, they grow a few millimeters per millions of years. So they take millions and millions and millions and millions of years to grow. And what would happen essentially to mine, I mean, the technology is there and not there yet, right? Like it's not fully working, but they're still testing it. They're doing exploitation and they're going down. It's essentially a big, massive bulldozer that has a big vacuum. So they would essentially drop it down, I think like 4,000 meters down, um, drop it down, and it essentially would vacuum up. And the way that they say it is, it will selectively pick up the nodules and like leave off the things. And so they'll vacuum it up. It'll go all the way up, essentially. They'll take the rocks and then dump the rest of the sediment, and that leaves like sediment plumes. And the thing with the deep sea, like we meant, it's this cycle that kind of goes, but it is very slow. So these plumes can stay for who knows, like it doesn't really move. In the 80s, there was one site that was mined, like a deep sea mining test site, and they revisited it a few years ago. There was still the tracks. They said it looked like it had been done yesterday in terms of, these organisms in the deep sea, some of them live 4,000 years. So when we're talking about going to get them for something so small for so many short years, when these things live in concepts of time spans beyond any governance regulatory process that we have.
Yeah, so interesting to compare the the speed at which the extraction would be done, will be done, and the long-term effects of this, right? So it takes millions of years to create these layers of rare minerals, and I think they come from dead fish, essentially, right? Dead living beings that leave a very thin layer of special materials that they contain in their organisms, right? And that's how they end up on the ocean floor, right?
Mhm.
And this process takes millions of years, but sucking this up and spraying the trash essentially, or the content, the extra content that they don't need, like to dispose of the rest, will destroy basically even the upper layers of the ocean, right? It will
Exactly.
like spread destruction everywhere because it will like overlay the ocean with a layer of darkness that will kill everything under it, right?
And we don't really know, right? So the
Okay,
kind of push is that we don't know. Like we know really so little about the deep sea processes, about the deep sea
right.
organisms, that the big push is a moratorium, like a precautionary approach. We do not mine the sea. We say no until we have enough information to say if we should or shouldn't mine it. I mean, that's the approach that like
Yeah,
NGOs and like the different thinking states that don't want to mine the sea are pushing.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's the precautionary approach, right? Can you explain a bit
exactly.
what it means? What is the precautionary approach?
Yeah, exactly, to
Okay,
just say
so
that until we have enough scientific information that we don't move forward with it. And so that's what it is with the deep sea, which the problem with that is this 2-year rule, right? Because then the deep sea companies are saying you're violating law because we need to mine regardless of if you have it or not. Um,
Corinne?
I wanted to say I agree with Antoine. It's a beautiful point, the one you made about these creatures that live within time frames in millennia, basically, and they are now being their lives and habitat are affected by governance systems that are so short term. And I wanted to say that it made me think of plastic, basically, also this concept of like creating something that lasts for thousands of years and then using it for, I don't know, a grocery bag that you use for 5 minutes. The concept of time in these issues is quite striking.
Yeah, exactly, for the deep sea. And that's kind of the biggest thing that I think of is the processes of the environment, the processes of nature, the process of the biology doesn't fit with our process of policy. It doesn't fit with our process of governance. And that's maybe when we take a step back and say, okay, should we just leave this resource? Because, and what they say, what these mining companies say is, we will take exactly what we need and leave the rest. And like, what reality do we know that that happens? Like, how much do we need, right?
Yeah, how much do we need? That's a very good question.
All of
I would
it. I
like,
don't.
right? Yeah, yeah, of course. Like there, you mentioned something in your paper here. So my question is, the concept of common heritage of humankind, sorry, because yeah, of humankind was applied to the deep sea. But is it a theory of private property like capitalism, or a theory of collective ownership like communism, right? Because like we have the left and right spectrum that is that is really related to politics, but it's about property, right? It's about who owns what.
Yep.
And in this concept that you defend on the deep sea, you have the idea of common heritage of humankind. So what does it imply regarding property and ownership?
Mm-hmm. Especially when Pardo brought this up, he specifically used the word heritage and not property, because he specifically said that property contains connotations of power and ownership, and he wanted to avoid that. So I think that is what happened, in the sense that maybe the commons right now is looked, the way that it operates is a private system, right? And the way that it kind of should, or the way that it wanted, or the way that they wanted to put the commons is to operate more of like all of ours. But the way that it is operating is private. It's companies using states to get contracts. It's not people, it's not even countries that are doing it. It is literally corporations and private industries that are going to exploit. I mean, it is some countries, but it is private. So in the sense, the common heritage of mankind is there. It's just for show. It's just basically an empty label is how it got transitioned into UNCLOS, unfortunately.
But it's interesting for people who would like to put in place a different system, right? And the point you were making in this paper was that it's not about property; it's about non-property, and that was an interesting. And you expressed this as a third way, right? Because if it's a shared um, territory, then it's not property, isn't it?
This was what Borgese was trying to say, and to be honest, I need to go get her books to read about this more. And what's really crazy is I wanted to share this, but my master's was done at the International Ocean Institute, which was founded by Borgese, which did all of this commons and all of this work and all of this stuff towards this. And none of my master's degree did I learn about any of this from the own institute, which is founded on this commons and this stuff. But I think just to kind of show that how watered down everything got, in the sense that they're not even
Right.
like pushing this stuff anymore. I only am now looking into it after, and it's kind of like really disheartening to even see nobody kind of pushing for this, and it's almost like everyone has kind of given up, which the really point that I want to make is that deep sea mining regulations are still being written. The negotiations are happening in July. If anyone in any of these countries have not yet joined the moratorium, like every single country, every country that has joined UNCLOS essentially. But when we look at the common heritage, it is all of ours. It doesn't matter if you live near water, if you still breathe this air that the ocean provides you. So this common heritage, like, to give it to all of us, and my sense would be that we leave it alone.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, of course. So I think what's interesting here in hearing you here talking about the private interest is, and the fact that some countries also defend it, right? Or also advocate for deep sea mining and exploiting resource. Like, it's interesting to note the difference, the differential of power between private interest and economies here, because we're talking about island states and private companies. And the private companies we're talking about, well, those are the leading industry on the planet, right? This is like the interest that is behind this push, especially for deep sea mining, is AI, data centers, technology, right? These are the ones pushing for this exploitation, and this is the sector that is majorly in growth right now. But even like spatial exploration, just to mention the space companies, space exploration companies right now, which is also private interest. So all of these will need materials, will need minerals, and the opposition by the states, which are supposed to defend shared interest, defend the common good, is well, I don't want to say non-existent, right? But it's difficult to perceive its role, right? Um, how is it managed concretely? Because you look at this very deeply, you know exactly how it's working. So, for example, what happens if a company X and Y wants to access minerals in the deep sea on of an island ABC, right? How is the power distribution working?
Mhm.
Who's in charge? Can you explain a little bit the process?
Yeah, you touched on a very important point, which doesn't just exist for deep sea mining, but overall in the whole sea. And this is why there's so much things that happen, like illegal and unregulated fishing, is that, I mean, when you look at land and territory, it's very obvious, right? But for the seas, you can have a flag that's registered, like you have to have the ship registered to someone, then it can be owned by a company in this country. And by the time that you end up, it's like 5 countries are involved in this one thing. And that's kind of I think the complexity of it. So as you said, okay, what if a company wants to mine? Essentially, this territory, the main territory for these modules, is in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone in the Pacific. And they just go and get a state that is part of the ISA. So I think there's
What is
100
the ISA? What is the
International
ISA?
Seabed Authority. So
All
it's the
right,
one that protects and also gives the exploration licenses at the moment.
got
They
it.
use a state, so the company would go to Malta and say, hey, I want to use you to mine the sea. So then Malta essentially is responsible to make sure that they're like doing it right because they're using Malta's flag state to do it. So what they do then is, this is a problem, right? It's a flag state thing. I'm using Malta because many ships are registered here for a thing, but when it comes to the deep sea, it's also the same. So they use countries that might have some lax, or not just lax, not have the financial capacity to make sure that like all of the checks and things are in place. So they would go to the country and say, hey, I want you to sponsor me. That country would sponsor them. And then effectively they get a piece to go and explore. So that has happened in the past and it hasn't worked out so well. And right now what they are doing, the company, one of them, that it didn't work out well when they did this, now they're going to the US because the US can do it on their own, which is a whole another thing.
Okay. We will not have time to cover everything, obviously,
Yeah,
because
I
we
know.
will try to keep under 1 hour. But I want to ask about ecological sovereignty because you talked about this, right?
Yeah.
In one of your papers. And let me try to formulate a question here. Um, I had it prepared. Where is it? Where is my question? Yes. Can you explain ecological sovereignty? What is this? What is this concept? And how it applies to the conservation of the deep sea? Because I think you made a great point. Um, yeah, please.
Gosh, the definition of ecological sovereignty is not going to be on my mind right now because that was the assignment and I can't give you the exact definition, but
That's okay.
essentially,
Just make a definition,
yeah,
your definition.
yeah, in the sense that at least for the deep sea, there was a few ways to look at the framework from like I guess this ecological sovereign perspective in the sense that, well, first, like I said, we take a step back and okay, let me take a step back. Some of these concepts that we can integrate, for example, are like the rights of nature and to give the deep sea its own sovereignty within that. So to say the deep sea is its own independent ecosystem. And so before we then do anything, we're treating it like this, you know, independent entity, individual, essentially. That's how I see at least ecological sovereignty being used specifically for the resources of the minerals, more because, yeah. um, and I think the point that I really want to make is that these concepts can still be applied, right? Like the mining code is still being written. Oh, interesting.
Go on. Try to finish your point. I will read the question.
Yeah, just that the mining code is still being written. And so when I say that these concepts like the common heritage of mankind are there, but they're empty, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that's the time for us to kind of take reign of that and say, hey, this is what they tried to do back then. This is what we need to do now. And you can see many things being pushed, like I'm saying, rights of nature, different rivers, different lands, different territories getting their own right to say this is a living system. And with the deep sea, I think that's really what's needed to save this last resource, like to say this is something that we collectively first, it's its own individual. And then from that, then everything flows differently, right? Then we wouldn't just say, how do we mine it? We would say, do we need to mine it? Okay, no, it takes a million years to reproduce. Maybe we don't touch it. So just that in itself, I believe would almost, be enough to leave this resource.
But at least it gives us an intellectual framework, a conceptual framework to address this and see and consider responsibility and custody of the resource, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let me read Mia's question. I have a curiosity about seaweed aquaculture and how they're being used for seaweed-based biodegradable plastics. Companies like Sway, Notpla, etc. pose circular seaweed packaging as regenerative with benefits to the ocean ecosystem because of its carbon sequestration potential and other biodiversity support that seaweed offers. Do you see this as important for a green transition? What kind of disadvantages are there tied to these solutions that, from my perspective, are providing market-based replacements but not challenging growth-based and financially extractive system? Great question.
Yes, such a great question and such a heavy loaded question that is like it's so true. It kind of goes with this push of what we had said of like the blue growth. So just like there's aquaculture, there's seaweed aquaculture. I will say that the ecosystems are depleted. So that means we do need to restore, right? Like there does need to be restoration, there does need to be conservation, at least from my perspective. So when we're looking at like seaweed aquaculture, like the way that I always first like to look at it is like who's doing it, like what community is doing it. Was there's like to look really in detail because okay, you can look and say, okay, well, this company, where do they get their seaweed? Is it just a private entity who's growing their seaweed in a building and then using resources, or is it a community and they're using seaweed to create like sunscreen or to create different things to create food? Because one of the things that I do for work is we fund the stuff, but we try to fund local communities and local people. So there's, for example, we fund in Tanzania where they grow seaweed and it's like local. So they have a few part-time jobs and then they turn that seaweed into like products for themselves. I guess you could, there's this whole argument of reducing the plastic. I completely agree with you, Mia. Like, I don't think any kind of just replacing one thing with another. I think that's like the biggest problem that we have right now, especially when it comes to, for example, the drive to minerals, because we're replacing cars with electric cars, right? That's why we need these minerals. So then when we replace plastic with other things, then we need to grow those things. So then, okay, even Sway, my company works with Sway. So I think there are good things from it, but I wouldn't necessarily say that like it's the way to approach it. I think it's the way that it is able to be approached now, in the sense that like that's the system that we have. Like conservation only works, unfortunately, if it's like funded or if it gives some market thing, unless you are, so unfortunately that's kind of the push, but I don't really agree with it, other than if it's, like I said, there's a place and they have no mangroves. Like we fund, for example, I don't know, mangrove conservation where there's like no mangroves at all. But then again, it's who is running that, because you always have these, these companies, like, are they from there? Are they just taking the resources? Are they just taking the money? Are they just creating a product to make money? I think that's the biggest thing to look at. I wouldn't say that it's a solution, because you're needing to kind of grow something. And also when it comes to that, I think to say almost like, okay, yes, the seaweed is pulling out that carbon, but you get really into this thing then where it's like the tree planting, right? And then you're going to like take over all of these places to say, well, we're going to grow this to pull the carbon. And then at some point, the system is imbalanced. And when you're looking at market-based things like this, specifically with the seaweed, it's market-based. So when we know like this, are they really using the principles that they need to? I would say mostly no. I don't know if that made sense, Mia, but your question is very good and very loaded, and I could talk about it forever. But
Right, Mia just wrote, thank you. Rose, we are heading towards the end. So please, everyone, if you have one more question, raise your hand or write it down in the chat. My last question is about the political agenda, because you follow this closely, and you also mentioned that legislation and regulation is still being designed right now. So what can people do? What can we do right now to have an impact on this?
For sure. I would say if your country has not joined the moratorium yet, there is a link. I mean, you can provide it, but you could just like Google and you can send something to your representative. But besides that, I mean, I personally connected with my own Maltese government here and got them to join the moratorium. And it's
What is the moratorium?
the precautionary pause to say there's 41 countries right now. So 41 countries at the ISA have said no, like France has completely said no to deep sea mining. And then other countries have said, we're going to wait. So essentially, we need more countries to say, at least, like, this is what we can do now. We should do more, but now, right now, that. So I believe July 19th is going to be like a global deep sea day of activation because, like I said, this month, the next month in July is when the negotiations are, and they're like really behind. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're like trying to push them through. So the most important thing I would say to reach out to the person who's responsible for that, depending on how your own nation is kind of done, to push them to join the moratorium. And then besides that, just like make people aware, because my biggest thing is also like, do people know that there's this ecosystem that has like never been mined and we're about to mine it? Like if more people knew, would more people say no? So more of just like also an awareness. Thank you, Olivia, for that. But that's what I would say is just to push for the moratorium. That's mostly what we can do now.
Thank you so much for coming, Rosalyn. It's been great. Thanks everyone for your questions and interventions and commentaries. That was really helpful. And on that note, if no last question, no last word. Rosalyn, any last word?
No, I appreciate it. I was I think a bit all over the place, but as you can see, it's so much information and so much is happening like every single day with this at the moment that it's just kind of like mind-blowing, and I'm happy that I could share it with people. If anyone wants to know more, I have some films, I have some documentaries, I have many things, so happy to send any more information to anyone that wants to learn more about it.
Very cool. Thank you so much. And I will link some of those resources in the video. Bye everyone. Bye on YouTube. See you soon, I hope.